Okay, and welcome. Today we have Major General retired Michael Repass, who is CEO of Able Global Services. He was a commander of U.S. Special Forces in Special Operations in Europe, the Joint Special Operations Task Force during Operation Iraqi Freedom, numerous other titles, accolades, accomplishments. And he is a West Point grad, like two of our summer interns we had, Claire and Lynn, who joined us because of, we've had a nice relationship with people like General Repass. And, we hope to see them grow into contributors to our organization in the future as well, hopefully under better circumstances. Today, we're going to be talking about Ukraine and General Repass's trip to Ukraine. He is back recently. I just want to remind everybody that this is the International Conflict Resolution Center based in Washington, D.C. We are an independent 501c3 organization, a think tank devoted to territorial integrity, resolution, and mediation of international disputes. You can follow us at www.icrcenter.org. You can donate to us or find more information at info@icrcenter.org and follow us on Twitter at Conflict Center, which is our handle. So, General Repass, welcome. I just wanted to ask you, just at the outset, can you give us an idea of what you saw over there, what your impressions are? Is this vision of imminent war that we hear about over here something that is real? Is it a kind of a chimera? Is it semi-real? And what, is there a possibility that the Russians may try to provoke some phony sort of provocation? But just give us an idea of what you saw over there when you in your recent trip.
So the first off, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. It's nice to have a stateside discussion about Crimea or Ukraine and the collateral issues associated with that. Of course, it's in the news lately, and that brings me to my first point. The thing that strikes you immediately when you get to Ukraine is there's an intensity mismatch. And the intensity on this side of the Atlantic versus what's going on that side of the Atlantic, and particularly in Kiev and in Ukraine, is remarkable. The Ukrainians are going about their business of trying to reform the state, build its institutions according to Western practices and democratic norms that we're used to, with the help of NATO and the EU and other organizations that are there. The United States is a heavy contributor to what's going on in Ukraine. But while they see the lion at the gate, so to speak, the fact of the matter is Ukraine's been at this for quite a while. Going back 100 years, Russia now and Soviet Union before that, and even before then, the Bolsheviks have visited all manner of unpleasantries upon Ukraine. So there's a long history of visitations and expeditions of unpleasantness in Ukraine from the country to their north. Of course, right now, what we have since February of 2014 is we have occupied Crimea and occupied parts of eastern Ukraine, known collectively as Donbas. And so what I saw working with the government and the military was that people were going about their business and doing, I would say, prudent planning and urgent actions in preparation for anything that may be coming their way. I was particularly struck by a video teleconference that President Zelensky had 2 Fridays ago on the 23rd of January, I believe, 23rd of January. And in it, he said several things that were of note, and I just want to hit a couple of them. The first one is, hey, everybody calm down. particularly in the Western capitals. I need you to calm down. And the reason I need you to calm down is because I, President Zelensky, as the leader of my nation, I have a better feel for what's going on here than what you do from your perspective. And it's important that you give us a chance to sort through these problem sets without this intense discussion of invasion is imminent, attacks are around, just around the corner, etc. And the reason I say that is because it was a rather impressive speech, quite frankly. And there were two audiences. There was the international audience, and there was the domestic audience. On the international side, he was certainly talking to Russia. He was also talking to the Western capitals, with the U.S. in particular, to include President Biden, who he mentioned by name. Please calm down. I think he did a wonderful job of communicating a very serious message. He conveyed it with sincerity, and I think he went a long way in reducing the tension, certainly within his country. So overall, my impression is they remain somewhat calm, but concerned and urgently acting to do things that they consider prudent preparations for what may be a Russian invasion. I will tell you that the majority of that preparation is hidden from Western eyes.
I was going to say, yeah.
Yeah, it's purposely hidden from Western eyes because they, quite frankly, they have offset concerns. They appreciate the help. They certainly appreciate the supplies of ammunition and training and all that. And there's no doubt that they need it and they want it and they greatly appreciate it. However, we're not allowed to see what they are physically doing or what they are doing in preparation for anything that Russia might be up to.
But you mentioned 2014. I mean, they've essentially been in a war of attrition since then, kind of a World War I flavored kind of a staring match across trenches with, when people are taking casualties and rounds are being fired. So, I mean, this is nothing new to them. Do you think that is lost on some of the Western media, that this has been going on for a while?
Yeah, so I think the current crisis really goes back to, well, first off, Putin did the same thing back in the spring as he scaled up, offensive capabilities, but he left out some key assets. He left out attack aviation, and he left out helicopters. So those key assets weren't present. They're present now in big numbers. So I think we've seen this before. So he's going to scale up and scale down in accordance with his time schedule and for his own purposes. But to that point, this started getting serious in November, shortly after there was a armed UAV strike in Donbas, where a Turkish-made armed UAV operated by Ukrainians struck an artillery piece that was being fired across the zone or the line of separation into Ukrainian positions, and I assume it killed some people there. I don't know if they were Russians or they were, separatists or who the heck they were. But from there, escalation started. The strike happened in October, and immediately thereafter, the escalation started. Well, the media, if you track the media reporting on this from October into November and December, up to probably 3 weeks ago, it was, oh my gosh, Russia is escalating up to 175,000 troops, and they're massing on the borders, and invasion is imminent, and so forth. And then the media really got out into the hinterlands, up in Kharkiv in the north, Sevastopol in the east, over on the Sea of Azov. They started talking to people, and they're finding a different story. They're finding a tremendously different story, because what has happened is Putin intended to galvanize support among the Russian-speaking people there and the ethnic Russians that are in Ukraine. Because when separation happened in 1991, about 12 million Russians became Ukrainians. Essentially, they were living in Ukraine, and they became Ukrainian citizens. So he was looking at that audience to galvanize them. So 12 million at the time. They got a population now of about 41 million. So let's just say it's around 12 million still. So he was hoping to have those people be, essentially his core constituency for an invasion. What has happened is the opposite. Because these large Russian-speaking cities are near Donbas in the combatant areas, as you talked about, people are dying all the time. Ukraine has suffered 15,000 casualties since the conflict that started in 2014. And the majority of the people that are killed are Russian-speaking people, just plain citizens that were killed by Russian offensive operations, and Russian-speaking people in the region that are subject to bombardment from across the line of separation at the hands of separatists or Russian artillery or long-range rockets or whatever the device is. And so in the large concentration areas, the large urban areas of Mariupol and Kharkiv with 1.2 million, Mariupol with 750 or so thousand people, they've said they've seen it firsthand. Excuse me, they've seen it firsthand. They say, we don't want any of that. We have jobs, we have economic development, we have a viable economy here. People have a place to live. And what Putin brings is destruction and division and isolation. And that's not anything we're interested in. So there have been large demonstrations. Most recently, you've seen large demonstrations in Kharkiv, which is astounding, quite frankly, because Kharkiv was the actual capital of Ukraine in the Soviet times. There's been a complete reversal there. 56% of the populace says they will take up arms, not just passively resist. They will take up arms against Russians if they invade. That's a huge turnaround from what you may have expected in 2014 if you're Vladimir Putin, or perhaps even in 2019 if you were Vladimir Putin. So there's been a huge, I would say, domestic change in the sentiment based on the very combat actions that you mentioned, Chris.
Well, do you look at this? I mean, you were over there under NATO's auspices. I mean, I think the conventional wisdom that isn't being reported is that a blitzkrieg type invasion is going to be very, very costly for Putin. Did he basically miscalculate and think, that puffing up and threatening this would have the effect of galvanizing these ethnic Russians, and B, weakening Ukraine's resolve? And apparently it's had the exact opposite effect. With the very public that he was looking to basically maybe start, give him his casus belli, as they say, and then B, with the rest of the country. Do you think that he's miscalculated that and we're just not seeing it?
Yeah. So first off, short answer is yes. I think he's miscalculated badly. I talked to somebody 3 days ago, and he and I agree that we don't know what advice Putin is given. We can only guess that Shoigu and Gerasimov are giving him their best military and national security advice, but they're somewhat skewed by their limited understanding of the problem set as well. So perhaps they have a view of, hey, it's 2014. We'll go there. We'll have a cakewalk in the country. We'll have limited resistance. People will rise up and welcome us like they did in Crimea and Donbas. And it won't be an issue. Times have changed. We don't know if he's getting that read or not. It's certainly being told in the international press now, somewhat in the US press. I saw some things on CBS News and some other major media networks that were carrying, the man in the street type interview. But we don't know if that's getting through to Putin or the people that are feeding Putin his assessments. More important, I think, just going from the macro view of what's going on in Ukraine, which we just talked about, is the solidarity that's been demonstrated internationally. I think as part of his calculation, he saw that politically, Germany, Merkel stepped down. You got a new leader in Germany. Germany and France are somewhat the European leaders in NATO, and so Germany, UK, and France. And we know that UK's got some domestic issues. France has some domestic issues as well. And Germany just had an election, got a new leader in there. He generally holds the US in contempt. He's painting President Biden with the same brush that he painted President Obama with contempt. He sees a older gentleman statesman in President Biden and views him as weak. There was a report back in the fall about the September timeframe following the evacuation from Afghanistan, where you see a statement come out of the White House that was attributed to President Obama, counseling then Vice President Biden, don't let your generals drag you into another war.
Right.
Okay, so you've got that backdrop. So let's walk this back here. You've got the debacle in Afghanistan. You've got social division in the U.S. You have unbelievable demonstrations, violent demonstrations in the U.S. You've got a split electorate and a split Congress, and so you see division all around you. So the play is that there isn't solidarity behind the leader in the U.S. And the U.S. being the security guarantor of Europe, Europe is somewhat divided itself because of internal issues as well. So a distracted U.S. and a weak U.S. with a distracted and divided EU and NATO potentially makes for an easy pick of Ukraine, which solves several strategic issues that he has. So that may have been the calculus testing the water back in the spring, but then going for broke this winter, starting in October, November with his escalation. So yes, I think he has overplayed his hand. He has badly assessed the situation, and the situation has changed radically against him since his escalation started in the mid-fall.
Well, I wanted to ask you before, and we're going to get back to European partners. We will get back to them, particularly France. Some statements that President Macron made very, very recently, within the last 2 hours. But I wanted to get to this then. So do you feel, from what you've seen there, that perhaps he is pivoting now to, all right, I'm not going to blitzkrieg them. I'm going to basically just keep the noose, if you will, on, destabilize them. And thus, while I'm doing that, basically incorporate Donbass and Crimea. And Ukraine is basically going to be in a constant state of emotional or psychological siege, if you will, because that creates, that kind of a mindset creates just an automatic distraction and a drain on the nation, a drain on the economy, and a drain on the national will. Do you think that the key now is just to leave these assets in place, let people stew over them, and then in the meantime he's basically trying to incorporate Donbass and Crimea, directly into his polity? I mean, they're basically parts of Russia, and that's that, and there's nothing they can do about it.
Yeah. So I think you've accurately described the situation since 2014. Create a domestic issue that creates instability and distrust in the government, and creates factionalism inside the populace. Excuse me. Creates factionalism inside the populace. So that wedge is there. It was there with the invasion of Crimea in seizure of Donbas as well. So everything you describe is exactly what's going on there. Now, as far as spinning up, he had last count he had 84 or so battalion task groups from multiple military districts around Ukraine, and he's bringing in 14 others from the Far East. So he can't leave these forces in place forever. What he can do is he can bring them in there, create cantonment areas and basing for them in the region, and then send the troops back home without the equipment, or send the troops and the equipment back home. But they have a place to come to, as opposed to a patch of woods to go build your lager site in your cantonment area and training areas. So he is certainly scaling up and scaling down at his will. He has the initiative for escalation and de-escalation for sure. And he's somewhat conditioning the target being Ukraine and the international community. He's desensitizing us to this scale up, scale down. So this is the second time he's done it. My personal assessment is that he never intended to attack. What he intends to do is get political and security concessions without having to fire a shot. Putin is not a risk taker. Donbas and Crimea were easy picks in 2014. The easy stuff is over now. The nation has said unequivocally they're going to resist. And the military that they have now is not the military of 2014. Furthermore, they have a very robust territorial defense organization and these volunteer brigades that will be very, very detrimental to anything that Putin does in the area. So I think that he is not going to invade. This is my summary on what I think will happen. Is he will not invade. He never intended to invade, and he wants to extract security concessions out of the U.S. and NATO / EU.
Well, let's get to what President Macron was doing. He had talked to President Putin at opposite ends of an incredibly large table. The optics there were pretty bizarre. But they were a little bit closer together than the optics would show. Is that he did say as a great power in terms of NATO and EU, France should be involved in this process. And I don't think there's anybody who would disagree with that. However, he did say that that Russia's security concerns, and I'll put them in quotes, were legit, and they had to be discussed at some point. That we can't just drop that. He also said that the Minsk Accord should be followed, and that at some point Ukraine is going to have to think about what to do about Donbas and Crimea, and give them some kind of status if that is the trade-off of getting these troops even out of cantonment and away from their borders. I mean, to me, General, that sounds like a surrender, pretty in slow-mo, as you said, without Putin firing a shot. But however, he did repeat, the troops have to go. This is not anything that that NATO will stand for, et cetera, blah blah blah. But then comes back to this notion of legitimate security concerns, and that he considers Russia a part of Europe, and that in response to his words today, experts on both sides of the Atlantic were using terms like Finlandization and things like that for Ukraine. So I mean, it's interesting on an academic level, but very troubling on a practical level. What's your take on all that?
Well, your opening was very strong. I found a bit of humor in one of the pieces there. You talk about the optic of being at this huge table with nobody in between. So from a Ukrainian perspective, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So here you have Russia and France talking about Ukraine. Ukraine being a sovereign country, they have their own ideas on what their sovereignty ought to look like. Uh,
Right.
so, so I mean, I understand where Macron's coming from, but he's playing into the hand here. But let's look at what's going ahead, what's going to happen here in a few days. We're going to have a security conference in Berlin under the Normandy format. That's Germany, France, Ukraine, and Russia in Berlin. I think that's next week that's going to happen.
Yeah.
So what happened yesterday? You had a German chancellor visiting the US president. And today you got Macron visiting the Russian president. So I think they had homework assignments. Hey, you take care of Biden, I'll take care of Putin.
Right.
And then, and then that way, when we come to the Normandy format, we'll be up on what each other has to say from those perspectives. So when the Normandy format goes down in Berlin next week, I believe it is, it'll be Germany, France, Russia, and Ukraine talking about the way ahead. What I had hoped for coming out of that, and I still hope for this, is that Germany and France will do everyone a favor and offer a ladder down from the escalatory platform that Putin has found himself on. We did find in the past 12 hours or so an announcement out of Russia that they're at the end of the exercise period, they're going to redeploy the forces out of Belarus to go somewhere else. The training is over. So if I were you, Chris, and in your ICRC role, I would be looking at, what are the steps down on the ladder? What are the de-escalation steps that we can take? And Putin has already taken one. And his de-escalation is he's announced that at the end of the training period in Belarus, we're going to redeploy those troops. Now, he didn't say that they were going to redeploy them back home. He can move them around to the east or to the north of Ukraine or whatever he's going to do. But the bottom line is that they're not going to be in Belarus, according to him. So says Putin. To the degree he can be believed, remains. Right. But it would seem to me that if he says it and does it, that's a very strong message, because he said all along, and his subsequent subordinate mouthpieces have also said, hey, we're not going to invade Ukraine. This is all just training for us, and this is what we do. And then he goes ahead and does it. That gives a very strong message there that he's doing what he says he'll do in the form of escalation and de-escalation. So perhaps that's a good faith statement.
Right.
But more than what he says is going to be what he does in the next 2 weeks. So I would hope that Russia takes the de-escalation measures that are offered to him in the Normandy format next week. Now, in regards to your specific points on Minsk, I was told bluntly by a member of the parliament that this business of Minsk will divide and destroy our government. The patriotic wing will collapse, and there will have to be a new government. So if abiding by the Minsk Accords means that Ukraine has to negotiate directly with the separatist elements in the regions and grant them independence or some type of I don't know,
Constitutional status.
constitutional status, then that in fact is, as you described, that is a surrender to the aggression from Russia. So Russia gets the opportunity to change international borders by aggression, which is not something that Europe should tolerate, because that's not the end, that's the beginning. It's just okay. I mean, do we have to go back for it? I mean, we've already got Moldova, we've got Georgia, and now we've got Ukraine. So what's after Ukraine? I mean, that's once a decade. Yeah, once a decade we get an incursion here where we change international borders. So that going insisting that we go to that Ukraine goes to the Minsk accords and abide by those is political suicide for any Ukrainian government, past or present. And Putin gets what he wants. He gets a very weak, divided, and socially, I would say, substantially disrupted government and populace in Ukraine, thus keeping them weak, subservient, and unable to get on with the necessary reforms for NATO and EU membership.
Well, I know you don't have a Carnival Midway turban on your head to be able to read minds, but I mean, can we game out that this was not that maybe Macron was the one who kind of raised this? Do you think that Macron was doing this as kind of laying down a cookie trail or something for Putin, or just to give him something to kind of sweeten things for when they do have the Normandy format talks? Because if you start talking about Minsk to Ukrainians and you start using terms like Finland, I mean, obviously that's going to obviously turn them off, but maybe get him a little more geeked up, if you will, about sitting down with them. I mean, do you think this was a ploy or something?
No, I don't. I think I think what you got France representing Russia's perspective, and Germany is going to represent the U.S. perspective. Okay. And then you've got the opposing sides there. So you got 2 and 2. And so out of that dialogue, that dialectic that's going to happen, you're going to have something that perhaps meets the definition of statecraft, and everybody gives some to get some.
Right. Well, before we go to, I know you have some some show and tell for us.
I just gave you the most positive and optimistic viewpoint of the whole thing.
I didn't want, yeah, you did, and I moved too quickly. You did do that, and I thank you for that. Hopefully, the world will notice that. But you have some slides for us, and I wanted you to see, present them, and so our audience can see some of the things you've been working on.
Yeah, I'll hit some of the highlights, and I'll skip through some of the wordier slides if you don't mind. But I would like to give you a picture of a couple of things that are somewhat strategically important in Ukraine. So let me start with these slides here. Are you there?
There we are.
All right. And go to slides. Okay, so can you see these, Chris?
Yes.
Okay. I started building this some time ago, and I've updated it. I'm on revision 5, as you see, and I took my name off of there because you never know where things like this end up. So first off, I got to give a disclaimer. I'm not giving NATO or U.S. government perspectives. I'm giving my analysis, basically, and everything I've got is open source. I have no access to secret information, et cetera. But I spend hours and hours daily talking to people, reading stuff, et cetera, trying to glean what's going on there. Okay, and I'll go big to small, and then I'll skip over most of this, and I'll get into Russian grand strategy in Ukraine in the next 60 days. First off, on Crimea, just for the audience, the larger audience, who owns it? Well, first off, the Tsar annexed it in 1783, but Khrushchev gave it back in 1954. Khrushchev was one of the great oppressors of Ukraine when he was in uniform during World War II and before. So he must have had pangs of guilt and said, "Oh, my Ukrainian brothers, I oppressed you, so let me help you out here." And he gave Crimea back to him. But Putin, being a clever bear that he is, stole it back in 2014. But it's really the oligarch's playground nowadays. But most importantly, and strategically relevant, is the Black Sea Fleet there. So they are a strategic asset. They've been rebuilt, and it has tremendous impact on regional security for multiple reasons that I'll get into later. There are key waterways around there, and I'll discuss some of these, the top 3 in particular. I'll also talk about the Volga-Don Canal. Most people can't find it on a map, but I have a map for you. So there's the topography of Crimea. You see the tall mountains down in the south, and you've got somewhat of a coastal plain receding to the north there. That that topography is very favorable to agriculture. It's also militarily significant. So if you control that high ground to the north there, you have the possibility of putting radar sites up there for early warning of anything coming up out of the Black Sea, both by sea and air. You extend your range substantially. Sevastopol being the port of call for and the home port of the Black Sea Fleet. Of critical importance to Crimea, if you're going to hold Crimea, you must have water. And the water for Crimea primarily comes from two sources. One, the North Crimea Canal, and two, groundwater. In February of 2014, when the Russians invaded and seized Crimea, Ukraine cut off the North Crimea Canal. It flows from the Dnipro River to Crimea. You see these pictures of this dried up canal now.
Right.
And here's the track of the North Crimea Canal. So it flows from the Dnipro River down across the very narrow isthmus from the mainland to the Crimean Peninsula there. And then it provides agricultural and drinking water for the peninsula. It is absolutely critical. So that thing is run dry. So agriculture is dying there. So the economy is in the tank, and fresh water is at a premium there from groundwater sources. They can't do desalinization plants because the technology is embargoed because of various sanctions and so forth. So nobody's going to do a desalinization plant for them. And Russians don't have indigenous desalinization technology. And it would take a couple of years to build it. So anyway, so they have no water is what's happening there is pretty bad.
And it seems to end at Kerch where the strait is.
Yeah, we'll talk about Kerch here real quick. Let me hit the key terrain up there on the canal real quick. So I did a Apple map search, and I found a boundary there. You see the boundary in red between the mainland Ukraine and Crimea. The canal runs straight through there, and that blue dot there is the border control point between the two entities. There's the Google or the overhead imagery of the place that you can find in the bottom left. You see the water runs up to that border control station, and it stops. That's vegetation down in the bottom of the canal. There's no water in the canal beyond that border control station.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Okay. Yeah. So you mentioned Kerch Strait. There it is geographically. Sea of Azov to the north. And we'll come back to that in a little bit, but I just wanted to geolocate it for you with the main canal on the left-hand side of the island, Kerch Island, or whatever it is there in the middle. There's the actual bridge that was built after 2014. The bridge looks like that. And it's interesting. You see on the right-hand side there in the diagram that the bridge is 227 meters wide, but it's really, really low. It's only 35-meter clearance. What he has done is he's effectively built a transportation inhibitor to anything that the Ukrainians have in the Sea of Azov. All their maritime vessels of any import, oil, fishing vessels, etc., have a clearance of greater than 35 meters, or need a clearance of greater than 35 meters. So he's effectively shut off any capital ships from going up there, to include container ships and things like that. So it's only minor shipping that can pass under that bridge.
Wow.
Cool. Yeah. And that's over the main shipping canal, as you see it going up
Yeah.
to there. Okay. Just coming in a little more graphic. So on the left-hand side there, you see at the left-hand bottom corner that bridge is built on a series of pylons. Those pylons allow the tidal flow between the pylons. The Sea of Azov is very shallow, so you get huge tidal fluctuations in there. This is also a tectonically unstable area, subject to earthquakes, etc. So that bridge is exceedingly unstable. So he built this bridge knowing that the time is coming when some type of earthquake or cataclysmic event will happen, and that bridge will no longer be viable. So he has to do something to create a main supply route between mainland Russia and Crimea. That's the urgency here.
Right.
All right, just a little bit. It was open on May 18th, and if you look in the top right-hand side there he is, the man himself, driving that truck.
Are those water trucks, or might as well be?
You see the Russian flag on the thing.
Yeah.
He doesn't miss a lick. All right. Okay. Now we get into the pipeline business. This is an older map, but it gives you an indication of where the pipelines are coming from in transiting Ukraine, headed into the Black Sea ports, of Odessa and so forth, and then moving onward through Ukraine into Eastern Europe and then Central Europe. So there are a lot of pipelines that are very key to the Eastern European, Central, and Western European economy that flow through Ukraine.
And probably key to Bulgaria, Romania, as recipient ports,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Correct. Okay. Now the Volga-Don Canal Complex, you see it runs from Astrakhan on the Caspian Sea on the right-hand side over to Azov. The Eurasian Canal does not exist to my knowledge. It's a dream. It doesn't exist at the moment.
Right.
But the Volga River is connected by the Volga-Don Canal to the Sea of Azov, where he can move combatant ships back and forth from safe haven out here in the Caspian Sea. He can rapidly move them in 1 or 2 days west to the Sea of Azov and over to the Black Sea to help with any embargo of, let's say, Mariupol and the Sea of Azov, or on around to Odessa, with these coastal combatants that he has that both are capable of direct fire and long-range missile fires. And I'll talk about that in a moment. So essentially, the Caspian Sea is a safe haven against anything that the Ukrainians could range against it. Okay, so we've already talked about Donetsk and Luhansk, or collectively together. So the Russian methodology, well, you can read through the slide there. I'm not going to go through it in detail.
Sure.
And I think we've really talked to it enough. That's where the lines ended up after the ceasefire. And they're shelling across from the Russian side, or actually from the separatist side, if you will, which is really Russian cadre with local troops run. So, and there are Russian troops there doing various things dressed as other people as well. So those are the ranges.
Is there a situation, General, where maybe, you talked about the drone strikes? Did he learn anything from, say, the war between Armenia and Azerbaijan, in terms of just how viable his rocket system and his artillery, or vulnerable rather, his rockets and artillery are? It doesn't seem like he did learn anything. And perhaps that's fueling maybe some of his paranoia at this point.
No, I strongly believe that he did learn something from that, and that is in fact what's driving his paranoia. Specifically,
okay.
Yeah, what he learned is exactly your point. He learned how vulnerable his stuff is. So he's the #2 weapons seller in the world. So now his vaunted S-400 system and S-300 air defense systems and all the radars and stuff are susceptible to cheap, when I say cheap, in the range of $2 or $3 million armed drones out of Turkey, cobbled together with essentially hobbyist parts that are commercially acquired illegally, I might add, on the European economy. So he's learned that a cheap Air Force can defeat a very sophisticated air defense system, and once that's defeated, the well-established defenses can be defeated in detail, which is exactly what Azerbaijan did with Turkish technology. They destroyed the first thing they did was they destroyed the radars. Then they picked off the actual air defense system missiles. Then they picked off the acquisition batteries for field artillery, long-range artillery, and then they started picking off command posts, etc.
Right.
These armed drones. So yes, he learned how vulnerable his system is to a cheaply financed air defense or air onslaught using remote controlled UAVs. So when he got planked, if you will, when that artillery piece got struck in October, late October, I think that was a wake up call for him. He's like, I cannot allow this to happen in Donbas, because if they get emboldened, they will defeat in detail the defenses that are there and unhinge the whole gig.
Okay.
Furthermore, he's vulnerable from the north in Crimea because he's looking south primarily across the Black Sea. So he could be, I would say, aggressed from the rear, so to speak, in Crimea if the situation dictates it.
Right.
So yes, he learned a lot from that, and primarily how vulnerable his advanced capabilities are. They're very susceptible to interdiction by cheap armed UAVs. Further, last week or earlier, last week, President Erdogan was in Turkey, or from Turkey, was in Ukraine, and they inked a deal on Ukrainian production of Turkish UAVs. Right now, the Bayraktar UAV is the one that's being considered, but there's another model that has an increased range and can carry a rather large cruise missile with it for extended range. So an extended range UAV indigenously produced in Ukraine is a game changer and a huge threat to anything that's going to happen vis-a-vis Russia and Ukraine. So yes, he feels very threatened by that. And Erdogan just poured gas on it.
Right.
Okay, let me press on here.
Oh, sure. Go right ahead.
So some grand strategy. Talking about ends, ways, means. And when you talk about strategy, that's what you need to talk about. But first, on the demographic side, okay, let's see where we're at now and where we're going to be in about 20 years, 30 years. So combined population is nearly 1 billion between the US and the EU, while Russia goes down to 121 million. They lose 17% of their current population is the projection. We don't know fully what has happened in 2020 with COVID. He lost 11 times the natural death rate from the previous year. And then he, at last report, open source reporting, he lost over 800,000 people just to COVID in 2021 alone. And that was in the early fall that was reported. So he could potentially be over 1 million people died of COVID if open source reporting is to be believed. So he's got a demographic challenge due to public health, due to alcoholism and drug abuse, et cetera. So he's got some real issues there demographically.
Well, General, can I ask you really quick then? I mean, does this basically support the view then that what we're just going to see is just troops coming in and out of cantonment areas, just basically paraded around, moved around, and nobody ever really going into a serious, even a huge raid or something like that? I mean, there's no invasion, just people moving around because he can't sustain this.
I agree with the premise that he can't sustain it to the point that he's going to move people around or escalate, de-escalate. That seems to be the game to get his political end game moving. He's playing a weak hand rather well, and this is a extremely weak hand. that's played, I would say, with strategic skill, moving people around. So that the acme of victory here for him is to get his strategic objectives without ever having to fire a shot or one Russian boot touching Ukrainian soil beyond
Right.
where they're touching now. So that would be victory for him. Yeah. Okay. So there's ends, ways, and means. It's probably nothing new to your
Right.
audience. So let me talk about his strategic end. He wants to rebuild Russian greatness before it's too late, and to do that, he's got to use his people and resources before they're depleted. Obviously, we just talked about his demographic challenge, but he's also in a race against time on resources with his oil and energy resources. So don't know where that's going to be in 30 years, but I'm pretty sure it's not going to be as productive as it is now. But to do that, he's got to do a couple of things. And these are the things that he has to do. And the big one is really he's got to reshuffle or restructure European security from the 1997 period. And that's where NATO started to expand to the east, the 1997 era. The other pieces that you see there are his global chess pieces, if you will, things he's trying to remake. But of immediate importance is restructuring the European security picture. Get NATO out of the former Soviet republics. No NATO or EU in Ukraine. On and on. Get the U.S. And their sophisticated weaponry out of Eastern Europe, et cetera, et cetera. That is what I mean by restructuring European security, and perhaps something in the range of a new intermediate nuclear forces or conventional forces treaty.
And this would go for Georgia as well, correct?
Yes, agreed.
Okay.
Strategic ways. This is kind of his gray zone warfare or hybrid warfare business. I mentioned string of pearls in critical places at the bottom there. That's basically the point that he's astride both energy and communications hubs and means, undersea cables, things like that, throughout the Mediterranean, Red Sea, building in the North Sea, not the North Sea, but the Arctic Sea,
Right.
and the Arctic Circle. Okay. In regards to the INF, he's deployed his Caliber cruise missiles, which are nuclear capable. Those have been deployed for about 10 years. That's not true. Yeah, it is true. About 10 years. And those are the range arcs from where he has those capabilities. In the east, on the Caspian, with his naval forces, in Crimea, and then in Kaliningrad. So he has been in violation of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty since probably 2011, 2012. And he can range all of NATO in Europe with that capability. So, and he demonstrated it in October of 2015 by using the Caspian Fleet to fire his cruise missiles 1,500 kilometers into targets into Syria. Some of them hit their objectives, others misfired, didn't make it to where they were supposed to be. Others didn't hit the objective, etc. But the point is, he did it. And that's from safe haven in the Caspian. So that gives him a strategic edge, I would say, in this region.
Right.
The next one is in Russian area denial is the air defense network. You see up in the Kaliningrad, he's got some long range capabilities there with the S-400, et cetera. And the S-400s down in, I think it's Latakia. I think it's Latakia in Syria.
Okay.
And then, of course, in Crimea as well. What's missing there is the Ukrainian landmass. He's got a gap in his air defenses there that Belarus can't necessarily fill. When you get into, I would say, the nuclear escalation, de-escalation business, the longstanding Russian ultimate red line, they will launch nuclear weapons into Europe and the US, is the defeat of or penetration of Russian air defenses. So right now he's got a gap there, and strategically he is vulnerable through that gap. He's got two gaps actually. So yeah, something to be considered. So here's the current situation. I think I've talked about this. Sees the West, U.S. in particular, is weak and vulnerable. President Biden in particular, he sees weak and ineffective and certainly distracted. And then NATO is politically divided, perhaps France and Germany. And then timing matters. So peak ground frost or freezing in Ukraine is expected on the 15th of February. Only General Winter has come to play. And what General Winter says is he has a different idea. It's been warmer than normal in Ukraine. On Friday of this week, it'll be 46 degrees in Kiev.
Right.
So the ground ain't freezing anytime soon. So that's playing into his game. So he can take his toys and go back home and come back next winter.
Right.
So why is the ground freezing important? Because it's off-road trafficability. He needs off-road trafficability to create multiple lines of approach to his strategic targets or his operational targets that we're talking about here. He's already secured one strategic guarantee, which is President Biden announced about a month ago there'd be no U.S. troops defending Ukraine. Okay, so what is Repass's opinion? It kind of follows this model right here. He's going to escalate and de-escalate. 175,000. He's got probably 140,000 on the ground now. He's headed to probably 155 or so, maybe 160,000 in the next week or so. But that's only mildly interesting to a nation of 41 million people that are determined to resist. They are going to resist. So that gets into the strategic miscalculation that you and I talked about. Okay, so here's what I say is the deal for the next 60 days. He wants to secure land route to Crimea, but he must have fresh water for Crimea because he knows he's got, a clock ticking with that bridge over there. The bridge, it's a road and also a rail structure that brings fresh water to Crimea. So he's going to create the conditions where he can sue for peace, and some of the conditions are he must have a land route to Crimea, much like he has a land route to Kaliningrad.
Right.
Okay. So either he owns the ground, as in he seizes Ukraine east of the Dnipro River, down to and including the North Crimea Canal, and then he sues for peace. Says, okay, that's it for now. I don't know. He also splits NATO in the process. All right. Scenario 2, no war. I'm betting on no war. I'll get to that in a moment. Okay, we've talked about that. And he wants to negotiate strategic assurances from the West without firing a shot. That is resetting the strategic conditions in Europe. This is one of the things that set everything in motion back in the October timeframe, October, November. This is released publicly by the Ukrainians. They said then that this was a situation and they were headed to 100 battalion tactical groups. They're going to get to about 95, 96 by my count. So I've been tracking this since October. Here's the strategic picture from the US side. This is released by the Department of Defense. A key point here is the imagery that's being used. Ukraine has access to this imagery. It's not, and in real time, essentially. So this gets to the democratization of intelligence. So you have the Ukrainians giving their intelligence updates here, but it's based on imagery that looks like this.
Right.
This commercially available imagery is down to 1 meter resolution. So it's been democratized out there. So there are no more, I would say, deep secrets, with the great states with these overhead imagery capabilities now, because commercial companies have put this stuff up there because there's demand for it out there. And right now they're making a lot of money providing this kind of imagery to countries like Ukraine. So that's out of the Institute for the Study of War. I think this is probably the best graphic that's been released lately. They've updated this. I'm sorry, I don't have the updated one with you
Right.
to show you, but it's available online. And then all this to say that Repass's opinion, my assessment of this, is in the north where you have the troops in Belarus, in the northeast where you have them along Kharkiv and everything north of the Donbas area or Donetsk area. Those forces are there to fix in place the Ukrainian defenses in the event Russia attacks, with the main effort from the east and the south. Because what I say is that, okay, I'll get into this later. Okay, so the forces in the north are fixing forces, and the forces in the east, next to Donbas and Crimea, those are the main attack forces. So here's the negotiations that are going on. You see next is the Normandy format. And again, you brought up the optic of the table there, and I just, I had this in their briefing. I knew I was going to bring it up, but I had to say it anyway. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
Right.
Ukraine's got to be, biting their nails and wringing their hands, going, "What in the heck is Macron talking about over there?"
Right.
Yeah, I don't want to be on the menu. So anyway, we've already talked about most of this. So here's kind of the current situation. I assess Kiev as normal with heightened government activity, but no sense of panic. Certainly, there's no manning of the bastions in the streets at all. There's a very large build of the territorial defense force that's undergone tremendous change in the last 3 months, but there's no funding or equipment, and the people don't care. They turn out anyway.
Right.
They will wear whatever they have and bring whatever they got, and they'll go for it. It's interesting. I met with some government folks a week ago, and the opening statement was, as you see down there at the bottom of the first major bullet, Ukraine is not Afghanistan. What you're doing is a shame, meaning you're drawing down your embassies at the very time we need to show resolve. So, that when that announcement was made in the U.S. audience immediately had Kabul of the brain. What they picture is people clamoring to get on airplanes at the gates of Kabul airport.
Right.
Absolutely, that is not what is happening there. As of 2 Fridays ago, entirely 18 people have left the embassy on a authorized departure, meaning if you have extenuating circumstances and families and stuff like that, you can leave. 18 people out of what, 300 or 400 people at the embassy decided to leave.
Yeah, that's the figures that we were going with, and we didn't understand why the media was still hitting on this, that everybody's sandbagging the windows. It's not happening.
No, absolutely not happening. Now, I've been gone for a week, and things can change in a week, but it was a different story there than what the media was portraying, because the media was trying to paint a picture of, here we go with Kabul 2.0.
Right.
It's absolutely not the case at all.
Right.
Okay. I already mentioned that inside the government, prudent planning is going on, but away from Western eyes, so to speak. Okay. So if war comes, this is what I think it'll look like. The opening moves, diplomacy is allowing time for things to happen. And in this case, it's allowing time for Putin to move in his last battalion tactical groups from the Far East, which should close late this week, early next week. Give him a week or two on the ground, excuse me, for getting spun up on what the ground tactical plans are, and getting their ammunition, and getting tied into the command and control network. And within 2 weeks or so, he'll be ready to go. Well, by the way, the ground was supposed to be frozen on the 15th. So Repass's view is we're 2 weeks away for more than one reason, because the Olympics end on the 20th. And so US Intel has publicly announced that we think the 22nd is the date.
Right.
So I think timing wise, everything that I've said here aligns correctly with US estimates. Again, I don't have any visibility on that.
Okay.
Okay, so he's ramping up the information operations substantially, not only against Ukraine, but also against European countries and the US. He slowed gas deliveries down to Europe already just to say, hey, I can do this. It can be a lot more painful if you don't play along with my game. And that certainly has to be concerning to the major industrial states of Germany, France, and the UK, and Italy as well. Cyber attacks have had a massive cyber attack 2 weeks ago, and it's ongoing. We haven't seen anything that I know of in space yet, space denial. Maneuver, he's almost got his defensive, or he's got his forces in place there. All right. Now, here's 5 scenarios by, the gentleman, Luke Coffey. He
Right.
published this back in December. And I think what has happened with this these scenarios is they've been validated by everything that we're seeing there. So Luke did a tremendously good job, and kudos to him. And I stick with this. So my bet is number 3, land bridge to Crimea. For all the reasons I've discussed previously.
Right.
And I think Ukraine will go all out to destroy that Kerch bridge. First to deny reinforcements, and then to cut off any potential for replenishment of water or just commodities to Crimea, and Crimea is in a bad way shortly thereafter. All right. So here are my conclusions, and then we'll open it up to discussion. They want to go back to Russia wants international greatness, reminiscent of the Soviet days. But to do that, he really must have a reset to European security. So all the terms that you were talking about are all about the negotiation pieces for how we reset European security to take into account Russian concerns. I find it interesting that we have to take his concerns into account at the same time. He's occupying multiple states by the force of arms. Okay. Now, before I go back to the last bullet there, if you're Tajikistan or Uzbekistan, you have to be watching Ukraine very carefully. Or if you're Georgia,
Yes.
or the Baltic states,
Yes.
Unfortunately, Uzbekistan and Georgia and the rest, they don't have the assurances of NATO that the Baltic states have. So, but everybody is watching what happens in Ukraine because they're wondering, am I next on the menu? He certainly prefers not to attack Ukraine because he can't sustain it, as you pointed out.
Right.
So his theory of victory is a divided NATO without attacking Ukraine. And it remains an option if he wants to go there, but he can't afford it. And Ukraine is just a piece in the global chess game to force a relook at European security along Russian lines. Okay, so that's my presentation.
Well, yeah. Well, we are gonna. What we'll probably do is, leave that up to our audience to discuss and filter through that and to see what happens over the coming days. I mean, we've got, post Super Bowl is when the clock starts ticking for real, and it's interesting, and Luke's scenarios, as you said, have all been played out, all been confirmed, and all been legitimized. In the end, what we've heard from people like you, General, is that there's if there is going to be something, it's going to be small and probably in the south, but it's not going to be this blitzkrieg that has been hyped and discussed by people that we thought, kind of knew better. So, that's why we wanted to have this talk with you, to kind of put it out there that, we are looking at this, with a microscope and pulling it back to the bigger picture, to get an idea of what's really going on out here. And I thank you for this detailed talk, because this is a valuable tool in picking apart this crisis, and really looking at it at its roots. So I thank you for that. This has been a marvelous presentation.
Yeah,
Thank you
yeah,
so
well,
much.
absolutely. ICRC can do, I would say, our nation and the international community a huge favor by looking at the de-escalation ladder and finding out what the feasible climb down steps and rungs could be.
Well, I mean, and that's what we're looking at that now. I mean, because there, even from quarters that we thought weren't going to be viable, like you said, with the population of ethnic Russians. I mean, therein is an opportunity for us as well.
Yeah.
To use, to use them as a group that could, really push some change there, and in addition to the de-escalation ladder, as we talked about. And that's what we're looking at, anything and everything available to kind of keep this, even from being the kind of, recurring game each winter that Putin's playing. And it's really been helpful for us, for people like you, to put it in perspective, and in a much more practical look at things, because we're a practical organization. We're not dealing with kind of pie in the sky kind of philosophies. We're looking at on the ground realities. And again, thank you for giving us that direction.
Yeah, it's great. Thanks for the opportunity. Things are dynamic and changing. So, my information's about a week old, subject to change. So, in
Well,
2 weeks.
hopefully,
So you can hold me to a couple things here. The temperature in Kiev on
right.
On the 15th, I think it's going to be on average above freezing, and then the 20th through the 22nd, our reindeer games.
Yeah.
So it's high adventure for diplomats and generals in the next.
Oh
few
yeah. Well, it's going to be an interesting 2 weeks.
Yes.
That's why I'm using this week pre-Super Bowl to kind of get ready. So we'll see what happens.
All
But
right,
thank you, Major General Michael Repass, retired, CEO of Able Global Solutions. Thank you, sir. And again, this is a production of the International Conflict Resolution Center, and an independent 501c3 think tank based in Washington, D.C. Thank you all, and we look forward to the discussion coming.